Well, European lawmakers are reportedly considering banning and sanctioning Tucker Carlson over his interview with Russian President Putin. It almost sounds fake. I mean, it sounds like fake news, or it sounds like a Babylon Bee headline. But no, it's real, because he is apparently aiding a war criminal, according to the EU members of Parliament. Former Belgian Prime Minister, current member of the European Parliament, who is calling for the EU to impose a travel ban on the former Fox News host, as they say, that told Newsweek. So Newsweek called up, and I guess was calling around Parliament all over the EU. Hey, what about that Carlson? What do you guys think?
How dare he travel abroad to a place we don't like?
Yeah, they're calling him a mouthpiece for former President Trump and a mouthpiece for Vladimir Putin, and therefore he's assisting a war criminal, and then he should be arrested, sanctioned, wind up like Julian Assange. Really? Is this what we're talking about now?
Has anybody been sanctioned for interviewing George Bush or Obama or
right? Yeah, good question.
Cheney,
right? Yeah, I sat down with Dick Cheney. He's a war criminal. You should be locked up for interviewing a war criminal.
That's a good point.
Well, that's the thing, though. It's like let's say like benefit of the doubt. Let's say okay, he is. He's allowed to be if he wants to be. Like what the hell? Like if I wanted to be a mouthpiece for somebody, I'm allowed to do that. Isn't that sort of like constitutionally protected?
Right, you'd think.
I would think.
Well, you're constitutionally protected in the United States, right? But I guess in the European Union, of course, they don't really have those liberties, right? So I guess they can. We've seen this in Germany, going after journalists for their reporting in Ukraine. We've already seen that, and so there's a number of countries now in the European Union that are specifically doing that. So they don't have the same freedoms that the United States enjoys. Anders Asland tweeted this just a few minutes ago. Yes. And he's an author, writes about Putin. He says the EU should sanction Tucker Carlson because he is no journalist, but a leading Kremlin propagandist. The EU has rightly sanctioned a score of leading Kremlin propagandists and many Europeans for various reasons. It would be a mistake not to sanction Tucker Carlson. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. He's supposed to be an academic, right?
And he's gone over the European Union. He didn't even stop in the European Union. So what does this have to do with Europe at all, other than the fact that they're so willing and desperate to sell a war?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know what else I find
and inject themselves
funny about
into
the
this
whole
conversation.
thing? It's like a lot of the criticism that these people give about Putin is how he treats journalists. I mean, that's like one of the biggest criticisms. It's like, look at what he killed journalists. Look what he's done to journalists.
Right.
And then that's what they're calling for on a journalist.
Yeah, I guess they're saying that about him. I mean, and so meanwhile, the mainstream media is losing their mind too. So it's not just the political class. Mainstream media around the world. It's not just the United States. It's BBC. They're losing their mind over Tucker announcing that he's completed an interview with Putin. They're calling him every name in the book, of course, far right-wing propagandists, Putin stooge. They can't handle it. And they're mostly pissed about this part, at least the mainstream media is. They're mostly pissed about this part of Tucker's statement last night. Watch.
And yet the populations of the English-speaking countries seem mostly unaware. They think that as nothing has really changed. And they think that because no one has told them the truth. Their media outlets are corrupt. They lie to their readers and viewers. And they do that mostly by omission. For example, since the day the war in Ukraine began, American media outlets have spoken to scores of people from Ukraine, and they have done scores of interviews with Ukrainian President Zelensky. We ourselves have put in a request for an interview with Zelensky, and we hope he accepts. But the interviews he's already done in the United States are not traditional interviews. They are fawning pep sessions specifically designed to amplify Zelensky's demand that the U.S. enter more deeply into a war in Eastern Europe and pay for it. That is not journalism. It is government propaganda. Propaganda of the ugliest kind, the kind that kills people. At the same time, our politicians and media outlets have been doing this, promoting a foreign leader like he's a new consumer brand. Not a single Western journalist has bothered to interview the president of the other country involved in this conflict, Vladimir Putin.
River Deep Mountain High on our Rumble chat says, because they're watching in Australia right now, breakfast television in Australia. Good morning down there, down under. Says there's no mention of any war or Tucker on breakfast television here in Australia. Yeah, isn't that shocking? So you have to go to the alternative media. You literally can't get this in your mainstream media, and they won't allow it. They won't cover it, and they won't tell you the truth about what's going on.
You know, last night when this broke, I watched this and I thought, sounds reasonable, because the mainstream media has been lying about the war in Ukraine, but they don't know it because mostly they don't study. They just take what the White House says for its word and they run with it. And they are so committed to the Putin is a madman narrative that they don't dig for themselves. And so they are largely ignorant. So I thought to myself, well, maybe they'll dig when they see this. What can you say against someone that says we should hear all sides? Maybe this will shut them up. The lengths to which they have gone to discredit this and make it so that you don't watch it really upset me this morning. It was the first thing that I sort of consumed this morning while looking at to write the newsletter. And I just couldn't believe how dishonest and ignorant and how committed to ignorance they are in their attempts to discredit this before they've seen it.
Yeah.
It made me really, really sad, actually.
I'm just waiting for Rachel Maddow to do her little piece. Like, we were going to play some of the clips of the Tucker Putin interview, but we feel like we can't be putting out this information because it's false and we don't want you guys to see it.
We'll put it through our.
They do that.
We'll put it through our sieve,
and we'll tell you what you should see.
Yeah.
Right.
So that clip I just played of Tucker, where he's basically talking about, interviewing Putin, and of course them lying and how these media outlets are corrupt. That's what made them upset. That, of course, video has now been watched tens of millions of times, not just on his own Twitter feed, but it's been repurposed all over the world.
You know what else this made me think of is the fact that Tucker Carlson now is a template for a mainstream media journalist who's fired on the eve of war. And we had that already in Phil Donahue. Phil Donahue didn't have the reach of the internet to then say, well, then I'm going to tell you what you're not being told. I'm going to tell you the things that I was fired for trying to say. He didn't have that option.
Yeah, he was anti-war. Phil Donahue. Yeah, he spoke out against war. He called BS on globalists. Mm-hmm. Phil Donahue did. He called BS on warmongers.
Right.
And the
so
lies.
We're now seeing the beauty of the internet. I know there's a lot of ugly around the internet, but the fact that he can say nobody was going to put Phil Donahue on the air to give him this chance.
This is the Streisand effect on steroids.
Yes.
Is what this is.
Yes. Yeah.
For those of our audience that don't know what the Streisand effect is, can you explain?
It has to do with her home on the... Oh, you want to? Go ahead.
Or David, who brought it up.
You go ahead. No, it's fine.
You go ahead.
Okay, so it's just basically there was I can't remember like the exact situation where Barbara Streisand was getting ridiculed or whatever, and she tried to hide the information. And then by trying to hide it, it got elevated. And so anytime somebody tries to hide information, the opposite happens and it ends up getting more coverage than they wanted it to. So that's now called the Streisand effect.
I believe it was specifically her mansion on the cliffs of Southern California that she didn't want it publicized, or the address or where it was or the size of it or something like that. It's trying to hide
it was something small and crazy like that. But then it just completely exploded. Then everyone knew.
All right, let's get back to this clip. So the clip that I just showed you, let me just refresh your memory. Tucker talked about the corrupt media outlets, and he talked about the problems with journalists not wanting to interview Vladimir Putin, or at least not trying to get that side of the story out. They've been fawning over Zelensky for many, many years now, cover of Time magazine. So that part of it really set their hair on fire, really set these journalists' hair on fire. So here's just a sampling of their responses today. Take a look at this tweet from this guy. Please stop saying that Tucker is interviewing Vladimir Putin. Putin is just paying Tucker to spread his propaganda. He's Putin's mouthpiece, as the cartoon depicts here. Well, no, Putin did not pay Tucker for that. Here's another one. Stephen Morin says, make no mistake, Putin's poodle, Tucker Carlson, is a sub-Benedict Arnold piece of Shiite. Okay, so Benedict Arnold. I mean, literally, are you really an American, turncoat who then goes to Britain as a result of his turncoatness? Really, that's what you're comparing him to? One of the greatest known traitors in American history? Really, he's a traitor to the American people. If you think about that in those terms, what you're saying is that Tucker Carlson going to interview Vladimir Putin to get truth out, perhaps, maybe we don't even know the interview, right? what is about this war, Americans spending tens of billions of dollars to funnel into this war machine and this propaganda machine to get us into a world war, that's anti-American? Really? To me, I mean, that's pro-American, because you're asking the question, well, how does this benefit the United States to throw tens of billions of dollars into Ukraine and to have an entire country destroyed on the backs of NATO aggression? That's a good question. I would want to know that. And then Christian Amanpour. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say really quick, and that's Twitter. So I noticed that you didn't click on the second tweet after those main tweets. I'm sure they cited all their sources to show that Putin has paid Tucker, right? Like they probably have all the information posted there and cited so we can check it out.
No, they didn't. They didn't have any of that. It's literally, and yeah, I mean, so they don't have any of that. Christian Amanpour tweeted this. You know, she's a journalist from CNN. She says, "Does Tucker really think we journalists haven't been trying to interview President Putin every day since his full-scale invasion of Ukraine? It's absurd. We'll continue to ask for an interview just as we have for years now." Okay, so she's saying that they've been asking Putin every day to be interviewed. That's interesting. So why did they turn you down? Is it because of your totally one-sided, biased reporting on other major world events like Syria, for instance? As Syrian journalist Kavor Kalmasian tweeted about this, about Christian Amanpour, because you have a track record of not really doing journalism, but rather delivering threatening messages from the American deep state. What is he talking about? I mean, here's a sampling of exactly what he's talking about, his interview with Bashar al-Assad. Take a look.
Mr. President, you know the rhetoric of regime change is headed towards you from the United States. They are actively looking for a new Syrian leader. They're granting visas and visits to Syrian opposition politicians. They're talking about isolating you diplomatically and perhaps a coup d'etat or your regime crumbling. What are you thinking about that?
I feel very confident for one reason, because I was made in Syria, I wasn't made in the United States, so I'm not worried. This is Syrian decision, should be made by the Syrian people, nobody else in this world. So we don't discuss it in Syria.
What would happen, do you think, if there was an alternative to you? Who is the alternative to you?
Could be any Syrian, any national Syria, and we have a lot. I'm not the only person who is eligible to be president. We have a lot of Syrians, so we don't have any problem about that. But no Syrian would be allowed to be president if he's made anywhere outside our borders. This is a Syrian principle.
So, you know what the regime, all it talks about regime change. They want you out of here. They want you out of here. Who would be a good replacement for you?
This is not even the most egregious. We've seen her coverage of Israel, and it's just abominable. It just basically is all about how the United States needs to continue to support Israel. No questions asked, civilians be damned. And, you know, even if it gets horrific, more horrific than it already is, what are we going to do? Because we have to keep doing it. There's no critical thinking in her coverage of that conflict. We've gone over it and over it and over again, over it.
I was going to point out that I feel like she said it right in her tweet. She calls it an invasion when we've learned that it's more of a liberation than an invasion, right? So like that alone, anybody who calls it an invasion, in my opinion, has not been educated.
That's a really good point. I missed that. You're right. She's missing the nuance of this conflict, which is, that is in and of itself a repeat of state lies.
So BBC is also pissed. Steve Rosenberg said this. He works for the BBC. Steve said, interesting to hear Tucker Carlson claim that no Western journalist has bothered to interview Putin since the invasion of Ukraine. We've lodged several requests with the Kremlin in the last 18 months. Always a no for us. Always a no for us. I wonder why the BBC, the biggest propaganda newsroom in the world, arguably, they turned down for an interview. I don't know. And can you, by the way, this is the same British government, the state-run media, that literally told the Ukrainian government, talked them out of a peace agreement. You're going to invite the state, you're literally inviting the government of the United Kingdom into the Kremlin for an interview? Really? Okay, maybe.
Well, and also selective editing, like these channels like CNN, BBC, they're infamous for selective editing.
Oh, of course. Yeah. You'll never see the full interview. Are you kidding me? So Jen Psaki had this to say, you know, former mouthpiece of the Biden regime, the warmongering Biden regime, had this to say. Listen.
It might be worth asking yourself, since it is getting pretty serious, what is this really about? Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist? Has he threatened to get me fired for disagreeing with him? So why does permanent Washington hate him so much? If you've been watching the news, you know that Putin is having a border dispute with a nation called Ukraine.
Border dispute is certainly one way to characterize a major military invasion. Of course, Carlson is now just another far-right conspiracy peddler with a show on the internet. He's no longer on Fox, as we all know. And he's apparently been spending the last few days in Moscow for some reason. Who knows? We don't know why. He has to stay relevant somehow, so I guess we'll learn in the coming days. Maybe.
Jealous much? And girl, yeah, study the conflict then. That is so upsetting.
Yeah, has to stay relevant somehow. His numbers, his viewership numbers, absolutely destroy your viewership numbers, Jen Psaki. Has to stay relevant somehow. Our show here on YouTube and Rumble has better numbers than most of the MSNBC broadcast numbers. Here on YouTube, our show has to stay relevant, Jen Psaki. Really?
One piece of Tucker's content probably gets more views than her show does in a year.
Yes.
Most likely.
Absolutely.
She
case.
doesn't do that in even a month. Even she won't.
No.
But even let's talk about the substance of it, right? Because who is she interviewing? She's interviewing, intelligence community shills who are on the payroll, part of the deep state. She's interviewing, she's interviewing.
She interviews
Biden, White House.
Rachel Maddow.
Right. She interviews
Someone
Joy
who's
Reid.
Another journalist on her show to get her on her network to get her take. It's I hate to use this term. It's a circle. You know what?
Circle jerk.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is.
I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking the same word. That's what it is.
Like,
it's an ugly term.
Who from our network at MSNBC could we have on our show this afternoon to really get to the heart of the matter? Or we could go interview Assad, or we could go interview the president of Iran. By the way, Lester Holt did that last year. By the way, where is the crime of Lester Holt from NBC News, who went and sat down with the president of Iran? I mean, the list is endless for the people that sat down with world leaders and who have then come back into the United States. It's unbelievable that they would have this moaning outrage, and they haven't even seen the interview yet. That's the best part of it. The interview drops tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern time on Tucker's channel, by the way. Tomorrow, I think it's 6 p.m. Eastern time, right? So they haven't even seen the interview yet, and they're crying about it.
I mean, I would like to volunteer as a guest. If you'd like someone to make an argument on your network that this is it not an unprovoked invasion, but something completely different than that, and I'll bring my maps and I'll bring my history lesson, I am available. So if you don't want to just interview people who are already on your network, now I get it, I'm an alumni. I was on MSNBC before. I will come back. I'm available so that you don't think it's so funny, the idea of a border dispute. I just would like to put that out there.
Well, hold on a second, because our time might be split. If Erin Burnett over at CNN wants to have anybody here from Redacted on her show, we'll educate her about what's going on in the world and what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Russia, and what's happening geopolitically in the Middle East right now. Erin Burnett, of course, a mouthpiece of the deep state and CNN. This one really takes the cake, I think. Erin Burnett calling Tucker a member of the MAGA GOP and worse. Watch.
A massive shakeup in Kyiv coming as Putin is trying to court the MAGA GOP in the United States. In fact, one of the leaders of the MAGA GOP is in Moscow tonight. It's the man you see here with the MAGA leader Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson. Possibly there in Moscow to interview Putin. Definitely there as a Putin-supporting celebrity. Just listen to how Russian state media is breathlessly celebrating his visit.
Independent journalist Tucker Carlson has flown to Russia from the U.S. via Turkey to Vnukovo Airport. He saw Spartacus Ballet at the Bolshoi Theater, had lunch in a nice restaurant, went for a ride around town, rode the subway. He charged his smartphone via a USB port and connected to a fast and free Wi-Fi internet.
He charged his phone, although they're knowing the details about the fact that it was during USB port may give him reason to think twice about all of this. But Look at them talk.
First of all, just a side comment on that. How is that breathlessly praising his arrival? They're literally giving him like a point by point of what he did. If the Pope arrived in the United States, if I was on the air at Fox News at the time when the Pope came to Philadelphia, I would have said, first he went here, he went to Independence Hall, he then went to the Liberty Bell. He then met with a group of, Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts who...
They cover where Taylor Swift has lunch before a Chiefs game.
Right.
That's news.
And also, to me, that sounded more like he was praising like the infrastructure in Moscow. Like he went to
great ballet.
He went to the ballet, which we're known for. He went and he saw our subways, which we're proud of because they're clean and they don't have homeless people defecating on top of rats with a pizza. Like he's like, he was like, it was almost like he was breathlessly praising Moscow, not so much Tucker Carlson. Anyway, back to the video.
We'll see what.
Sorry, go ahead.
Talking about him like a celebrity. Everything he does on camera, breathlessly repeated. Now, it is unclear if an interview between Putin and Carlson will take place, but if it does, it gives Putin a chance to sit down with a big supporter.
It might be worth asking yourself, since it is getting pretty serious, what is this really about? Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist? Has he threatened to get me fired for disagreeing with him? Does he eat dogs? These are fair questions, and the answer to all of them is no. Vladimir Putin didn't do any of that.
I love that.
I'll actually always remember why.
That's the same freaking clip that these guys want to keep using over and over again.
What did he do to you?
Like Jen Psaki plays the same thing.
Right.
You know, what did he do to you? And I love the breathlessly. He just breathlessly praises,
That's what I meant when in our text message this morning, like the memo went down. The memo from the top went down to all the news agencies. And so we're going to see this same exact clip, this same exact story over and over and over again until...
Breathlessly. Breathlessly.
Yeah.
Watching that clip, I was standing in Ukraine 48 hours before the war began there. Well, Carlson then stood by Putin consistently all the way through. And that is why he can go to Moscow now without any fear of being summarily imprisoned. He's a hero. This was Putin's mouthpiece in the United States, somebody who had turned a blind eye to the atrocities committed by Putin because they were happening far away. Once vibrant towns turned to ruins, mass graves with dozens of bodies in the Kyiv suburbs, a theater full of innocent women and children sheltering, bombed, despite the giant world's children written on the roof, more than 200,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed or injured. And tonight, Putin is trying to seize on the fact that Zelensky's military appears to be in turmoil, capitalizing on a moment of intense American political dysfunction and intensifying.
Yeah.
Silver Charm in the chat says she eats dogs.
Right. She's just randomly throwing out things, child dead, roof collapsed.
Oh, I'm so curious, though. Did you miss the 2 civilian bombings that Ukraine carried out in the last 2 months? Did you miss that? One was at a bakery and the other one was at a farmer's market.
I'm sure she totally
Did you know
covered.
about that? Because you were in Ukraine 48 hours before the war began. So I'm just curious if you caught all the civilian attacks that had been for a precedence of 10 years. So curious. Or did you just get the ballet tour that was in Ukraine?
Wouldn't it be amazing if she did the opposite and just rattled off all of the things that actually happened? Like, Minsk agreements shattered. Peace agreement destroyed at the hands of Ukraine.
Zelensky ordering an attack on Crimea. Yes.
Yeah. State media destroyed, gone, blocked, sold off. Churches closed. Priests taken out. Journalists killed, by the way. U.S. journalists. Where's Aaron Burnett's outrage at U.S. journalists being killed in Ukraine? That's a good question. Did she cover Gonzalo Lira at all on her channel? I didn't see her covering that at all.
She's sitting in a multi-million-dollar studio, and we're in a small studio. Tucker's in a small studio, but we can at least focus our cameras because she was not in focus that whole segment.
That's what was bothering you? Okay.
Yes.
While we're at it, I didn't like that blowout.
I'm in my attic, and we have more viewers than CNN does, which I'm proud of. So yeah, that's how the mainstream media is responding to this. Are you guys subscribers here to the channel? We're live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern here on this channel. It's again, I was messaging with Tucker about what he was seeing in Moscow, and he was saying the story that people don't understand, and he was saying, I can't believe how clean the city is, how how beautiful it is. And he said, he's going shopping. And then we saw some photos today of him actually doing that. So going grocery shopping. And he said, I think the sanctions here have made Russia tremendously stronger, much stronger than the West even knows about, which is amazing. If
that would be true of his own personal sanctions, if that became a thing, it would strengthen his brand. If an entire block of countries decided, because you did this and we don't stand for free speech, we will sanction you, meaning you cannot have any assets inside the European Union or else we'll take them, or we will make it so that you can no longer travel inside the European Union, there would be a revolt if that actually happened. One, because it would sort of bastardize everyone who's an American passport holder, make them think that if the European Union doesn't like what you do, you can be punished. It also would just weaken the American passport, so it would put egg on the face of the State Department. So I don't see that happening, but the fact that it's even being suggested. But again, it would maybe we could call this the Trump effect, is the more the mainstream hates you, the more popular you become. So perhaps that would be the case. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, who the hell's watching CNN and MSNBC anyway? I mean, no one's watching those crap channels unless you're at the freaking airport and you're stuck watching it. It's garbage. But, anyway, let us know your thoughts on that. I just saw someone in the chat say, did Gonzalo Lira die? Matt Derling wants to know, yes, he was killed by the Ukrainians in their prison system. So, yes, that did happen.
I was just going to point out really quick also, like regarding Rachel Maddow, like obviously they're not even keeping the viewers, the small viewership that they have happy, because she came back and like retracted after they didn't show Trump. She's like, we're going to show it this time, because they got so much backlash from their own audience that they had to make that decision to show him talking the next time when they didn't the first time. You know what I mean? Like that, They didn't just make that decision. They had to have got a ton of backlash. So their audience is dwindling.
Last night when we talked about how there is this pending interview coming, we talked collectively about how maybe we are wrong. Maybe we on Redacted have missed something. Maybe we're not right about certain parts of the conflict, and we will learn them from this interview with Putin. That, I think, is how the mainstream should approach this. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe there's something to learn. Maybe you missed something. It's possible. There's no humility here. They're like, oh no, we will learn nothing. We're just going to crap on you for doing this in the first place. So,
but I think the difference is they're wrong intentionally. That's the difference. If we're wrong, it's unintentional. They are wrong intentionally because they have an agenda and a message coming down from a higher authority to tell them what to say. So it's intentional.
They're willfully ignorant about a lot of it.
Yeah, because mainstream media, if they're wrong, that means the government, like the U.S. government, was wrong. And you can't have that. The U.S. government won't admit they were wrong until like everybody that was involved is dead. That's the only time they ever come back and say, yeah, we probably shouldn't have done that, or we were wrong. They don't do it while anybody's still alive that can be outraged. So it's like they can't admit that they were wrong, because that means that the government was wrong.
Then you have a 20-year gap between when the thing happened and when you can say it was wrong now, like the war in Iraq. 20 years later, we can say that, but 20 years ago, you could not. And so that's why it feels increasingly dangerous to say right now, these wars are wrong.
We just got a super chat from PsyOps. Says, hey, did they give the same treatment to Dorothy Thompson or that other American journalist that interviewed Hitler? I don't think so. And they didn't give that same Dan Rather interviewing Saddam Hussein. 60 Minutes interviewing Saddam Hussein like 2 weeks before we went to war with him, when we were actively calling him a war criminal, literally, and holding up vials of stuff that we were going to go attack him. No, we didn't do any of that. Lester Holt, like I said, interviewing the president of Iran. No, this is just for Tucker Carlson.
Didn't Ronald Reagan sit down with Gorbachev? Like, I mean, what's the difference between a president sitting down with these people?
They're hypocrites. They're just jealous. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. YouTube thinks that you'll actually like this next video right here. It's personalized based on your own viewing habits. So if you watch the video, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think about it. And we will see you next time, everyone.